how long should your HVAC system last? It's a loaded question. It's a question I get from time to time, and I want to go through why it's a loaded question. I want to go through a few things for you to know, things to think about, and maybe you might find out why your system didn't last as long as a neighbor's recently. That's one of the questions I got, where a guy on our website was saying, hey, my neighbor's system, it seems like it's lasted for years and years, and I just had to replace mine, and I just don't understand. And so I want to go through why that is, why some systems last longer than others. And when I'm asked, usually the person asking is asking for a range, like how long should this system last? You know, I'm budgeting here. Should it last 10 years? Should it last 20 years? What's the deal here? Let's dive into this. Let's go through a few of the things that really play a role in this. The first thing being the type of system it is. It's a loaded question because there is different types of HVAC technology. Some of those types of systems get more abuse than other types, and that plays a big role in this. And so one thing I'll just throw out there is I've seen probably more than the majority of systems that are furnaces where the furnace itself will outlast the life expectancy if installed properly and maintained properly and all that stuff. The furnace itself should last longer than the outdoor AC or coil that's mounted on it. I can't really tell you all the ins and outs of why, especially if you take the type of furnace it is. If you start saying an 80% furnace versus a 90% furnace, that 80%, it just doesn't require as much maintenance. And a lot of folks that have the higher efficiency furnaces, they don't have them taken care of like they should. And because of that, I've seen 80% furnaces get so much more lifespan than a more efficient furnace. Now, do I have any statistics to back any of this up? Not really. I mean, there might be some out there. I didn't even look, to be honest with you. I'm just going on my experience of someone that has laid hands on hundreds, if not thousands of these systems and what I see when I look at these systems. And so when you ask that question, are we comparing apples to apples? Are you asking what's the life expectancy on a straight electric heat pump system? Or are you asking what's the life expectancy on this oil boiler in my basement? There's a difference there. Another question I get when I bring up this point about furnaces and higher efficiencies and technologies and so on is folks will say to me, well, that just means the newer stuff, the newer technologies just obviously don't last as long. And I think that might be true in some cases, but one thing we're seeing that breaks that rule is inverter systems. We're seeing that communicating inverter systems, some of the higher efficiency technology, heat pumps and air conditioners on the market that have that inverter technology, they do last longer. And one example of that would be when I see compressors. Now, don't get me wrong, we're going to talk more in the moment about different brands and the types of compressors and things like that. But just in general, as a professional, I have replaced tons, hundreds, thousands, dozens, whatever, of compressors in my career. Single stage systems, single stage compressors, replaced a bunch of them. Probably could do it in my sleep, right? But I could probably count on this hand, one hand, how many inverter compressors I've replaced in my career. Now, it is easy to say that might partly be because inverters haven't been out as long. There aren't as many out there. And that was probably a valid argument at one point. But even now, as we're seeing more and more inverter systems installed, single stage systems installed right along with them, I just don't see a lot of inverter systems, if installed correctly, if maintained correctly, I just don't see the compressors failing as much. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but just in general, they just don't fail as much. Now, the argument I get from a lot of folks is, well, there's more bells and whistles on these newer inverter systems. There's sensors and there's all these different things that could go wrong. And that actually probably is a valid argument. It's like cars today, right? There's more things on them. There's computers and sensors and all these things. And so there's more things that could go wrong. And that's probably true. There are more things that could go wrong. But the argument of saying that they're just not as reliable, that today's technology is lower quality and they just don't make them like they used to kind of deal, I just don't think that all in all, that holds that much water. That a lot of the inverter systems that my company has installed, we install them and we don't hear back from the customer in a good way. So the type of system does play a role in all of this. Let's move on and talk a little bit about some things like maintenance. A lot of folks will say, well, I didn't get as much life out of the system, and I'm looking at a system that looks like you could make a wig out of the fuzz and fur on the coil for their cat. They could make a whole wig for their cat with what's caked up on that coil. And so when you have a system that can't breathe, it's designed to have a certain amount of airflow go across the coil and so on, and it can't do that, and it's starving for air, and it's getting more wear and tear, I think that does play a role in how long that system lasts. So having proper maintenance done, not just kicking the tires and having a company peek at it, check it. They'll say, I'm doing a checkup on the system, not just checking the system, but actually cleaning and making that system as new as possible again, I think plays a big role in the life of that system. Now, have I talked to some folks that did everything right, had it maintained right, and they still didn't quite get the life out of that system before a major repair? Yes, that has happened, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more later in this video on why I think that is. But proper maintenance, and then other things that play a role with maintenance are things like air filters. We have customers that they are having their system maintained. They are paying a professional to come out annually, but then you turn around and they're not quite on top of replacing those air filters like they should be. I would encourage you to figure something out. I heard a guy make an argument the other night on one of the social media platforms I'm on, and he said the timers on the thermostat, they're just ignored. So that's not working. What is something we can do to just automatically tell the customer it's time to replace that? For me personally, what I do in my household is I say that every year I'll pick a time of the year. So for me, it's every year on July 4th. Some people, it's every year on New Year's or Christmas or whatever that time of year that just automatically sparks you to think about that. And for me, every year on July 4th, I do a number of things. I clean my fridge coils, look at things like I have an annual media filter in our heat and air system, meaning it lasts an entire year. I'll get that replaced. I'll replace all the batteries in my smoke detectors and so on. I have a number of things that every July 4th, I know it's now time. It's time for me to go through. And so I would encourage you every month, have a time in that calendar. I have one particular customer, he says every month when he gets that electric bill, right? Because that's pretty automatic. That electric bill is coming. That electric company doesn't forget to send that bill. And so he knows as soon as he gets that bill, bam, it's time for me to replace my filters, or at least check them. At least make sure they're looking good. So find something that's triggering, something that, you can just rely on that will tell you, bam, it's time for me to do my monthly filter changes or my annual things to do, so on. Let's move on and talk about a few other variables that will play a role in the life of your heating and air system. I think another thing would be the location of that system. There's parts of the country where systems are located outside package units. I think a package unit in general, in my opinion, you're saying that some of the components that would normally be located inside and not be exposed to the elements are now located outside. And so that might play a role in this. And then we see some parts of the country where those package units are not just outside, but now they're located on the roof of a house. You've got systems that they sit out and bake in the sun, literally. I think that plays a role. Other things like in our area, I'll see customers that have heat and air systems that they obviously gave it no thought on where to install these heating and air systems, installing them like under trees and in the baking sun or near the driveway or near a dryer vent. Things like that, just putting a little bit of thought behind where am I installing this system and am I putting it in a place where I can get the most life out of it. And finally, another thing that might play a role in all of that is things like weather. If you've got a system that's getting hammered all the time, it's just getting hail, snow, rain, whatever, I would argue that there's places you can install that system versus others that might protect it a little bit. Where I live, I'm near the ocean, the waves and the salt water. It's not necessarily weather, but being closer to that plays a role in the life that you're going to get out of that heating and air system. And finally, I hear heating and air guys say all the time, all the brands are the same, all heating and air equipment, it's basically the same, so it doesn't really matter. You're just buying that sticker, you're just buying the name on that unit, you're not really buying quality. And I would push back on that. I would actually argue against that. And I have had customers make their decision on their next purchase based on their last purchase, right? So they had a brand X. This system lasted years upon years, and so they want to stay with that brand. And I've had other customers on the flip side of that coin say, I had that brand, I think it's overrated, I can't believe it gets the press that it does. Do not sell me that brand. Just realize if you do feel that way about a specific brand, there are brands out there equivalent to other brands. We've done videos on that talking about how there's a number of manufacturers. There's probably 7 to 10 major manufacturers, but we have hundreds, if not thousands of brands out there. And the reason is each manufacturer has a family of brands, if you will. And a lot of times the equipment is either equivalent, it's the exact same stuff, or it's at least somewhat similar. It's being designed and engineered by the same folks. That's just something you need to keep in mind. So if you had a brand X and you find out that brand is the equivalent of brand Y, you might want to stay away from X and Y. Just to wrap up, in summary, let me throw a couple last minute things at you. I think life does happen. I think that there are times when a system is going to get the life it's going to get because just things happen. Sometimes you could have 2 systems installed by the same person and installed in the same manner on 2 houses right next door to one another. We see neighborhoods where that's happening, where they're just slapping up houses and they're installing these systems, and you just don't understand why your neighbor got more life than you did. And I think that is because of life. Just some people get the luck of the draw, and you are having to, unfortunately, be the one getting the brunt of that. So just keep that in mind as you move forward to think about some of the other things we've already talked about. But I think life happens. I think the original installation really plays a big role in all of this. I think the life of this system can go all the way back to the birth date of that system, if you will, making sure that everything was done properly to get a good 15 years out of the system, if not more, doing everything possible, using proper brazing techniques and making sure everything meets code and just doing everything not sloppy and just professional. And that's one of the things I'll say to my guys. They'll say, well, I'm not quite sure. I might just do it this way. And I'll say, is that a 20-year fix? That's what I would always say. Is that a 20-year fix? And they'll say, I think they're going to get another year or 2 out of this. And I'd say you need to do a more permanent way of a repair. Don't do a year or 2 fix. Do a 20-year fix. And if that means you got to redo something, do that. And then finally, I think the big bottom line at the end of the day on what the actual life you get out of that system is repair versus replacement. And there's tons of information and videos out there regarding this where folks will say, hey, I've got a system here that it doesn't seem to me that it's time to replace it. It looks like it's got a lot more life out of it, but I've got this major repair that I've now got to pay for, that I've got to have a professional do. Something has failed, I've got to get it replaced and so on. And that plays a big role in this. What's the cost of that repair? And then what's the cost of replacing, getting a whole new system installed and all of that? And I see folks juggle that decision. They'll say the repair is X amount of dollars. Do I really want to put that much money into a 15-year-old system? Or do I want to just take that money and put it towards a new system? I think that plays a role in all this. I have a customer years ago that he had a system that, man, it was over 30 years old. And I'm not going to go into the brand and all the ins and outs, but it looked 30 years old, but it just kept chugging along, and the board went bad on it. I found the board. I told him, I was like, there's no way I'm going to find this board. And I found it. They still had the board, and we replaced that board. And as far as I know, to this day, that system is still chugging along. Does that mean all the systems that were made with that system and replacing that very expensive board, did it make sense when you consider replacement versus repair? Did it really make sense for him to do that? The bottom line is no one's a psychic, and no one can really tell you for sure how much life you're going to get out of a system, whether it's going to be 5 or 10 years after that repair, or you're going to have to call somebody within 5 or 10 months because something else has failed. So keep that in mind when you're making that decision. Is it time to replace? Did I get the life expectancy out of the system? If you like this video, I think you'll like this one even more. It's where I talk about the top 5 energy wasters in HVAC. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.